Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends. Well, as much as it drives Fuzzybutts all over this place absolutely crazy when they hear me say it, I am the host of this show, whether they like it or not, Yer Big Dog, Luke Robinson. And I'm happy to introduce my co-host, the co-producer of this show, and she's the executive director of the Puppy Up Foundation, Ginger Morgan. Ginger, how are you?
I am glad to be home. We had such a great puppy up walk in Madison, Wisconsin, but as you know, there's a lot of work that goes with that, and there's a lot of miles from Memphis to Madison. Not that I'm complaining, because I did get to eat cheese curds at least twice while I was there.
Yes, I've driven that stretch between Memphis to Madison many times before. And congratulations! Yes, you had a successful walk. You had a wonderful outcome. What's the word? You had a wonderful turnout. That's the word I'm looking
Turnout,
for.
yes.
Yeah, and the weather was good as well, which is
yes. As a matter of fact, Mother Nature was the first person I thanked on Sunday was for the weather.
Indeed. Well, glad to have you back, and I'm glad you're back for this show in particular. I'm excited about it, Ginger. It's an episode that's near and dear to our heart, and we have history with this episode and the study that we're going to be talking about. On that note, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Kelly Diehl. She is the head of science and communications for the Morse Animal Foundation. Dr. Diehl, how are you? Welcome to Fuzzybutts and Friends.
I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Good. This is actually the second time I'm going to put this out there. We had a little technical difficulties with the first go around. So thank you for scheduling a second time. And we're glad to have you on the show. We like to start our show every week with finding out a little bit about you. And we like to do that with finding out about your Fuzzybutts. So do you currently have Fuzzybutts with you at your home?
I do. I have one 10-and-a-half-year-old Labrador Retriever who's a little overweight, but I think that's pretty typical for Labradors. I have two kitties who are just celebrated their 4th birthday, so they're youngins. And then this is not my hobby, this is more my husband's hobby, but we have about 150 fish of a variety of different kinds, and 6 tanks.
Are those saltwater tanks or freshwater?
No, thank goodness freshwater, right? Because the saltwater are really, really tough. But it is a lot of fish.
Are there really enough freshwater? Is there enough diversity out there in the freshwater world that you can actually fill up 6 tanks? That's a lot.
There is quite a bit of diversity, though we have definitely found that certain fish are not. We have some big community tanks, and I wish I could say they all get along, but they don't. So I have learned a lot about which fish can go with other fish. And they're like, for example, angelfish are very aggressive. They look beautiful. They look serene as they float around. They are not. They're actually distantly related to piranhas, and they definitely can behave that way sometimes. We found some of that out the hard way. So that's why part of the reason for all the tanks, because the different freshwater don't get along. But like I said, that's kind of my husband's deal.
Well,
that's got to be a lot of work.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But it sounds spectacular. I like fish a lot, and I've only, I guess, seen saltwater tanks that were that big, and all the colorful ones. Ginger, we're going to have to expand the name of this show to Fuzzybutts and Scaly Butts and Friends.
Yeah,
I think
Fuzzybutts and Fins. How's that? Fuzzybutts and
Butts and Fins.
Well, yeah. But we have to. we left someone out of that mix, though, and that's the Featherbutts. Though we need to come up with something cute with Featherbutts too. Because we had someone on our show recently. She had a farm and was talking about her chickens, I think, and her chickens. All right, well, let's get down to business. We like to have a little bit of fun before we start the show, but we got a lot to talk about today, Kelly. I'm excited to talk about the wonderful work that the Morse Animal Foundation is doing. I know it personally and intimately, and I have history with it as well. But before we do that, tell us, Dr. Diehl, how did you get involved with Morse Animal, and how and you're also a practicing vet, or you're a veterinarian, so tell us your story as well.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting pathway. I practiced for just under 25 years total, and I knew of Morse a couple ways. First of all, a lot of us who were in practice knew about Morse because it was a place you could make a donation in the name of a patient that passed away. So for many years, I donated to Morris, not even, I hate to say it, realizing it was here in Denver. And I was practicing in Denver, but I had heard of it. And then I was lucky enough to get a grant from the organization. And I did some research in practice looking at inflammatory bowel disease and treatments in dogs. And I was starting to think about transitioning away from practice into communication. And this is where good deeds actually do get rewarded, because I called Morris to say, hey, I finally got a publication from that grant you gave me a couple of years ago. And where do I send the reprints? And they kind of said, well, what are you doing now? I said, oh, I'm trying to transition into writing. And they said, we need a contract writer. And that was almost 9.5 years ago now.
Huh.
And I started working for them as a writer to begin with, and then morphed into all kinds of media and communication.
All right, so is your title technically the head of science and communication, or is it science communication?
Science communication, but you're forgiven because that's my new title as of like 2 months. So if you see science and communication, we were kind of like, well, it's science communication that you're doing. So that's my brand new title. It's senior director now of science communication.
Excellent, excellent. Well, give us a little history of the Morse Animal Foundation, because you knew about it because you were there in Denver. But I can assure you, I didn't know a darn thing about Morse Animal. When I started my first walk back in 2000, and before I started it, when I was planning it back in 2007, 2006, 7. And then I learned all about it. It's a wonderful organization. But I got to tell you, I think you get this often. I thought it had something to do with Morse the cat. I'm sure you get that a lot, though.
We do a lot. Even now, we've been around 75 years, which is
Yes.
amazing.
Wow.
And it's a really long time. We're one of the leading funders of research in animal health. So we fund globally. A lot of folks who are veterinarians, particularly those in academics, which is where we fund the majority of our research projects, know about us. But a lot of people, just like you, do not, though the vast majority of our donations come from individual donors. We fund dog, cat, wildlife, equid. We expanded, we used to say horse, but since we do donkeys and mules, we're now equid, and llamas and alpacas. And we've been doing that, gosh, again, 75 years. Horses, I think we funded our first study in 1960, so a little bit after we were founded, and then wildlife a few years after that, which is a pretty broad portfolio, right, of different kinds of studies. Most of our grantees, as I mentioned, are from academics, but we occasionally will partner with other organizations. We've worked with Wildlife Conservation Society on some projects. We've worked with some of the marine mammal groups. We've worked with the San Diego Zoo. So sometimes, again, we have a pretty broad group of people we work with.
Yeah, I happened to notice on your website, I went there to just kind of catch up on what was going on, and I see now that cancer really has become a big part of your mission, the Morse Animal Foundation. But you're not a veterinary oncologist, though, correct?
Correct.
But what we know, Morse has some there that are associated with the team. Dr. Steve Withrow, who I know personally, he took care of Murphy, my second dog with cancer. I love the guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. Talk to us about how Morris started out as this wonderful foundation for food/farm animals, companion animals, and then marine and wildlife, and then how you've sort of transitioned into cancer and companion animals. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we actually funded our first cancer study quite a few years ago, probably 50 years ago, but we've really seen an uptick in cancer studies really in the last 25 years where if I look back on the grants being submitted, we can see it's interesting to follow a clear transition to what people are concerned about. And you can imagine in the early days was infectious disease, as we have done a better job with that, other diseases and cancer in particular. Again, last 25 years, we've seen a lot of grants come to us. We will often solicit ones. It's an open call, right? But we're getting horse cancer grants. We've done a few in wildlife, and of course, dogs and cats, with dogs being the biggest bucket of, and a number of canine cancer grants. Because of that, and because of a perception that cancer may be becoming a bigger problem in our pet population, particularly as our animals age, that the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study, which is our biggest project that we manage, it was conceived. Typically, we give money, we review grants and go, here's your money, tell us how you're doing, right? And we monitor that and evaluate it. But it was decided that we were one of the few organizations who could manage a very large longitudinal study.
Absolutely. And I want to speak to that. There's so much I want to talk to you about, Kelly, because it's exciting. What you guys are doing is so important. And it's something that I saw on my first walk from Austin to Boston. That was the real big need. And as a matter of fact, I knew, sorry, I can't remember the name of the CEO of Morris at the time. Ginger, it's that lady.
Patty Olson?
Yes, that's it. Patty Olson. That's correct. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And so we talked on the phone for a while, and I shared stories. And because my first walk, I walked across 16 states, and I talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pet parents that had their companions, their Fuzzybutts that had cancer. And I learned so much. I was just aggregating and collecting so much data. And so I would kick that feedback to Patty and the folks there at Morris. And to the point that I think it was Patty that did the feasibility study that preceded the Golden study, or was that David? Is it Hayworth or Hallworth? I can never get his name right.
Yeah. David came after Patty, and
Correct.
girls. Sorry, that's our acronym. We called it GIRLS, Golden Retriever Lifetime Study.
Yeah.
Betty Morris was very, very interested in canine cancer, and Dr. Rod Page, who took over. He's the head of the Flint Animal Cancer Center at CSU. So he came in after Dr. Withrow retired.
Right.
And they were talking together and kind of came up with the idea. And yes, they set the whole thing in motion. The three of them. Betty provided the seed money to get the ball rolling, and then Rod and Patty worked together to really get the foundations of that particular study going. Then David Hallworth came in when Patty retired, and David was the next person. And David was here as we started kind of the enrollment phase of the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study.
Yeah, are you still taking participants for the study? Okay.
Well, we'll get into the specifics here in a second. I'm dyslexic, and his name is spelled Hayworth with a Y, but it's pronounced Hallworth, and I get it mixed up. Is it spelled like Hallworth, but pronounced Hayworth? Yes, we had him on Fuzzybutts and Friends, and he's done so many wonderful, amazing things for our kids with cancer. What's interesting is, so Patty and I talked for a while, and that was the time when Morris had their first canine cancer. I think it was called canine cancer, not companion cancer, or one cancer. And it was your cartoon initiative. And I did not like that, nor did Ginger. And I think a whole lot of people were like, really, Morris, that's the best that you could come up with. But I guess you weren't running communications at the time. So you weren't, but very, very shortly after that, though, I was, I'm the kind of person that gives my honest, open feedback, because that's the only way data sharing works and makes sense. And so, it was Patty then that she did a feasibility study, and she had the consultants call me while I was on my first walk from Austin to Boston. And I think we spent a couple hours talking on the phone, and they asked me a ton of questions. What do what are pet parents asking? What do they want to know? What are you seeing out there on the road? It was really a wonderful conversation. But I told them is like, it's great that we're having now, and this is back in 2008. So we've come quite a ways since then. But even back then, pet parents are like, it's great that we're having some new treatment therapies out there for our kids. But what we really want to know is we want to know what the risk factors are for cancer. And that's something I always ask pet parents, what do you think is causing, or they ask me actually, what do you think is causing cancer? We talk to them, engage in dialogue. And so, we talk a lot about what the 3 or 4 big suspects are on risk factors of cancer in our companion animals. And I said, I talked to the consultants, and I think I communicated this to Patty subsequent to the fact after that. I said, look, if you're going to do anything, do a multi-year, very large N, as big of an N population that you could possibly have, and study them over a lifetime, because that's it's one thing to develop novel treatments and therapeutics, which will happen over time, especially as we have, I think the number we're all using now is 6 million new cases of cancer in dogs every year. When we have those numbers, drug companies they're now coming in, they're investing more money. And as you know, that's just how R&D works in the pharma business. But what I conveyed to the consultants and to Patty at the time was, look, if you're going to do anything, what I think that needs to be done now is a long-term, like you said, longitudinal study to look at what and help identify what the major risk factors are. That's what pet parents really want to know. But I knew at the time that a study of that nature would be very large and very expensive, which, as you know, the study has become. So that sort of, I just wanted to let you know what my history with the study was. So there are times when I'm feeling a little bit high in my head, and I feel like, well, I'm kind of a grandfather of that study if you think about it, because I helped shape it. But I'm so happy that Morris took that advice. I don't think I ever saw the feasibility study when it was done, but I know they picked up on it and ran with it pretty quickly. So that's my introduction to this wonderful study that you're doing. So on that note, Kelly, please talk to us about the Golden Retriever, Lifetime Golden Retriever study. And start from the beginning, what you guys want to accomplish, and then how and the enrollment and what's going on with it.
Right. So the study was set up, and we're following 3,000 dogs. And the reason the 3,000 number, first of all, was selected is because we had some statisticians and epidemiologists look at, well, how many diagnoses of 4 primary cancers, and we'll talk about that in a second, do we need to power the study? Meaning, if we see something, we can say, yep, that's probably not due to chance, right? Because you have to have enough animals to really decide, right? Like, yeah, living exposure to broccoli, which I'm making that up. Don't anyone think broccoli causes cancer, but to be able to say that. So the 3,000 was chosen. The second big decision was what breed of dog, because it was decided that using a single breed would actually help with the genetic analysis and make that a bit cleaner. And unfortunately, we know that Golden Retrievers have a high incidence of cancer as a breed. And there are lots of Golden Retrievers out there. So I figured, okay, well, we can get 3,000 Goldens, right? Because there's lots of Golden Retrievers. This is really, for sure, the Golden Retriever Foundation, which was involved from the beginning. They were very concerned about cancer, which is no surprise in their breed. And they were really instrumental in helping with recruiting. So we went with the Golden Retriever. We decided on 3,000 for statistical reasons. And then we wanted to look at, there were 4 primary cancers identified as they would constitute, diagnoses of these 4 would constitute the 500. And that's 500 total between the 4. And the 4 cancers are hemangiosarcoma, lymphoma, osteosarcoma, and high-grade mast cell tumors. However, every disease is being followed, including the development of other cancers. And we've had a surprise there. As our 3rd place winner is histiocytic sarcoma, a really aggressive cancer that we did not anticipate at the onset of the study would be as frequent frequently diagnosed in our cohort as it is. So we're watching
Wow.
everything.
Well,
And-
I'm gonna stop you right there because I'm going to
Yeah.
have to stop you because there's a lot of data and I'm going to have a lot of questions. But that's amazing information that I didn't know about, because we know that Histio most commonly affects Bernese mountain dogs and a few other breeds, but Berners are the big ones, and it really has wiped them out, that breed out. So we're seeing it now in Goldens. Is that correct?
Well, that's one of the questions. We actually think it may have been there all along, because we knew that they were a breed susceptible. And one of our speculations at this point is sometimes histiocytic sarcoma can look like hemangiosarcoma, but because we demand, well, don't demand, I don't want to say demand, we really strongly ask people, get a biopsy. If your pet dies suddenly, please get us a postmortem examination. And what we think is that some of these histiocytic sarcomas may have been misdiagnosed as hemangiosarcoma, because your dog dies, it's really emotional, it's fast. And I know from practice, I would look at a dog that looked to me like it died of hemangiosarcoma and call it hemangiosarcoma, right? But it may actually have been histiocytic sarcoma and we missed it. And I think that's an important point to talk about why you do a study like this, because you unearth things that you never suspected, maybe. We can talk about hemangiosarcoma is our #1 diagnosis.
Wow,
2 to 1.
Even over lymphoma?
Even over lymphoma.
Wow.
Which we were not expecting at
Yeah.
all, because we always trot around going lymphoma is most common cancer in dogs and cats. And I'm not saying it's not, but we were totally flabbergasted by the number of hemangiosarcoma cases that we have, which is by far and away the most common cancer diagnosis in our cohort, which we were not expecting.
Yeah, let's we just have so much to talk about this. One thing you said that, 3,000, a population of 3,000. I've learned that the Puppy Up Foundation, we fund comparative oncology clinical trials, and I think the largest we did, Ginger, was 100 and how many patients? But I know enough about science. It was less than 200. I think was the largest clinical trial that we funded, which, as you know, is expensive and is large. I mean, if you get a clinical trial with 50, maybe 100 dogs nowadays, you're probably you're lucky, you're fortunate. But even I know that less than 200 is, you have to ask yourself, what medically significant data can we extract from that limited population? So even I think 3,000 small, but 3,000 patients that you're tracking, that comes with a hefty price tag, because I know your price tag is still running. And I wanted to ask the question before we get into the types of cancer and talk about all that great information. I wanted to ask, so these 3,000 golden retrievers, it's a lifetime study. They're going to be studied until they pass away, correct?
That's our current plan. And that was not quite what we anticipated at the beginning. We were thinking that after 500 diagnoses, we would stop, because, as you mentioned, the price tag's pretty high.
Right.
However, our board has decided to make sure we have funds to try to continue till everybody passes away or drops out or whatever happens. So that's probably going to extend. We had originally estimated to end in 2024, and it's going to extend probably beyond that.
Yeah, because you're getting lots of great data. But okay, so talk to us about what you study, because I've heard, I don't think I've ever talked to someone from Moore specifically to get the actual information from the source. But I've heard things like you do everything, like you collect toenails and some fur, and so you collect a lot of data. So talk to us about it. What all information are you tracking about these 3,000 golden retrievers?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we collect a lot of data, and some of that is people go in every year and fill out this just gigantic questionnaire, and it has to be filled completely every year. Unfortunately, you don't get to say, look at last year and record that answer. They have to fill it out. It's well over 100 questions, and it's detailed. It can be some of my favorite questions I tell people are, we might ask, does your dog swim? If you key in yes, then we ask, where do they swim? Is it the ocean? Is it the pond? Is it a backyard pool, whatever, and try to estimate the time that they spend in the water. And then we even ask, what's the temperature? What's the average temperature of the water that they're swimming in? So very detailed. We'll ask things like, we have a big diet section, as you can imagine, that people have to fill out. And we would ask, for example, does your dog eat vegetables? Yes. What vegetables? If you key in bell pepper, we actually ask you what color bell pepper they're eating. What's the flooring in your house? Does your dog spend time anywhere else? And every year folks fill this out. Their veterinarian also fills this out. So we need to give a big shout out to a lot of these veterinarians who can spend well over an hour every year just filling out the questionnaire. And as you mentioned, every year the dogs go into their veterinarian for an examination. And during the examination, we collect blood sample, urine sample, feces, hair, and nails. And if a dog is diagnosed with cancer, they have to do that again. So the people are asked, please collect extra samples and fill out a questionnaire if your dog is diagnosed with cancer of any type. It doesn't have to be necessarily, right, one of the 4 that we're most interested in. And then finally, if a dog passes away, we once again ask people and their veterinarians to collect samples. And in addition to the ones that they do yearly, we ask for tissue samples. Even if a tissue looks normal, we'll still ask people to collect a small sample. So it's a pretty big deal. And all of those samples are biobanked. So we estimate more than roughly 5 million data points, which means question answers plus samples will be collected and stored by the end of the study.
About 5 million data points plus the samples as well?
Though they count. So
They
it's
count.
data, they count, the samples count as data points too.
Well, actually, they're data points right now, but they potentially could be more data in the future as we identify more markers and so on. We could do additional diagnostics and so on and so forth. I have a couple of specific questions to ask. Do you require the pet parent to have a necropsy if their dog passes away from cancer, specifically from cancer?
No, it's pretty emotional, as you can imagine. And so people, a few years ago, when we were early in the study, we asked people that specific question, and we actually sent out necropsy kits to a lot of people because, of course, this can happen on emergency, and you can't like call us up and say, put a box in the mail. So we had a lot of people opt in. They don't have to have a box handy if they decide, but some of these are pretty extensive. So it often requires people driving to, for example, a local vet school. And I'm putting local in air quotes, right? Because that can be several hour drive for some people. It can be a little overwhelming for a general practitioner, right? Like you're in the middle of your day and a dog arrives and they're deceased, and this can take several hours, right, to collect all the samples, and they have to fill out a form, right, while they're doing it and put things in different jars. So it can be a big deal. Some people just can't do it. And I understand, when it's really is emotional. And we have other people who are, I didn't think I wanted to do it, but now I do because I see it. But you are correct, Luke. We really try to encourage people, if their dog died of cancer in particular, to get a postmortem exam.
Yeah,
I just think it is very, very difficult for the pet parent to have a necropsy done. I know I did it recently on one of my dogs that passed from cancer. They were involved with the Canine testing, and that's still kind of early. And so he was sort of a bit of an anomaly. I can't even say the word. Anyway, forget it. I can't say the word. Anyway, he was a little different. So when I talked to the people at Pet DX, they really wanted a necropsy. And luckily, I talked to them prior to his passing. And so, it was a difficult situation. And I had a long discussion with my veterinarian who was going to do it on just procedures and things like that. So made it a little bit better for me, but it still kind of hurts.
I've
Oh,
never
for
been able
sure.
to do it. Yeah, I've never been able to. The three dogs that have of my kids that have passed, all three have died from cancer, and I've never been able to do a necropsy, and nor did I think it would be medically beneficial for because we knew what they passed from. It wasn't a surprise. They were end of life. It was terminal cancer. Hudson was a little bit different. That was a unique situation, but in the end, he died from cancer, and it came down to, is the risk benefit, cost benefit, the emotional pain it's going to cost me, versus what we can get, what information we could get out of it. So it's a tough one. Let me ask you a question, Kelly, that I've always been curious about. So if one of the enrollees in the study, if they actually develop cancer, does Morris fund the treatment, diagnostics, and the biopsies and everything to get the data, or do the pet parents have to do that?
A little of both, though. The burden is mostly on the pet parent. We will subsidize. We give people, I think it's still $500, which is not very, not going to get you a huge amount, but some people will comp. A lot of the vets will comp some stuff if your dog's in the study, and that can be used for biopsy. It can be used towards a necropsy. We actually have a little bit more for little help for necropsy, but in that the cost can be quite staggering for a necropsy, and it depends where you take them. And I almost hesitate to say, like, the range could be everything from, we'll do it for $0 to a couple $1,000. I mean, and that is no joke, depending on who's doing it. So we have a small stipend for people that they can use over their time in the study. And a lot of people have saved it, right, for biopsies and for the end. We really encourage people, don't use it for that little warty thing that you're taking off when they're 4 years old. Try to save it, right, for down the line. That was a little education we did for our cohort. But yeah, it can be pricey and emotional. But we also have a team now of people who are in the study who provide support. They'll help you take your dog where it needs to go. They provide emotional support. It's called the GO team, the GO team. And they have been really, really helpful because there's only so many of us. And a lot of this stuff happens on the weekend or in the evening. And where we can help, we do. But they've been very, very helpful with guiding people toward, here's what you can do. We've also done a priority list where we modified what we wanted in a necropsy and said, look, just try to get these crucial tissues because we know people are busy in practice, a veterinarian. So if a pet dies, look, if you don't have time, get this, right, and send it in. And that's been helpful, I think, for a lot of veterinarians in practice, because originally we had this huge list. They're like, oh my gosh, like I don't have time to do this, but the modified has really helped. And so we've got a lot of extra samples that way by doing that.
That's wonderful. You have a support team within that 3,000 family, and because I think that they're all over the country and the world, right? Those families. So it's tougher in some parts. It is all over the world, right?
No, they have to be in the lower 48.
Lower 48. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I'd met somebody from Canada that said they were in the study. They may have been joking with me, tricking me, but lower 48. Well, I know it's such an important study. I there for a while, I was thinking about dressing up one of my Pyrenees as a golden retriever, see if I could trick you guys into getting that, because the people that I meet that have Goldens that are participating in the study, they're so excited. They're so proud. It's like, I'm number 2,900 and yabba dabba do. I got in the study, right before they cut it off at 3,000.
I can't tell you how many golden retriever parents are like, we're number like 102.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a large number of pet parents that potentially could go through the cancer process. And as you know, I would imagine some of them would be for the first time. And it's always tough going through the first time. So do you so you have a little bit of money that you can help the pet parents pay for that. Do some of the pet parents that have a golden with cancer choose not treatment, follow-on treatment, instead do palliative care? Is that have you seen that happen?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
Because I think depending on the stage of the cancer, cancer can be expensive to treat. If you have a bleeding hemangiosarcoma in the spleen, right, that's an emergency. That's several $1,000s just to stabilize a patient if you don't do anything else, what's their average survival time is like 2 or 3 months. If you give them chemo, you might extend it to 6. Some dogs live longer. So it's a pretty big financial hit. Lymphoma, while treatable, and I had a dog with lymphoma myself and a cat with lymphoma too. But if I wasn't a vet and could write off some of that, I mean, that's expensive therapy, and that can go on for more than a year. So then that's a big commitment for a lot of people. So we have a lot of people who choose palliative care. We follow that as far as we keep track as best as we can. The chemotherapy protocols, especially for lymphoma, get kind of complicated, right? And then dogs come out of remission, and I've had to deal with that myself. But we are tracking that data as best we can as well.
Well, that's good to hear. My guess is I don't think that with diagnostics that you can get around cancer treatment for a companion animal for less than $10,000 these days. I just don't. Osteosarc, you got typically either the amputation or the limb sparing. Then you have the follow-on chemo. Lymphoma, like you said, CHOP is very involved, and I see at a minimum, if you have a dog with cancer and you want to give them the gold standard, right, the marquee care that I think most certainly every pet parent wants to be able to do, it's a minimum of $10,000, and that's a commitment. I know I've had 3. And it's well more than that. I think I'll owe care credit till the day I die of that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they're so wonderful what they do for pet parents that help pet parents to be able to afford the cost of care. So you're getting a lot of data. So you think that so is it 2024? You're not concluding the study, but are you going to use that year to publish results and data from that study?
We're actually working on that now.
Okay.
And we have a couple things. One is we've developed a partnership with the Royal Veterinary College in London. They have a really big group of folks that do epidemiologic work. So they look at trends and demographics, and they crunch all that data.
The numbers guys.
Right, they're the numbers guys. And we're working with them to start looking at not samples, but our data, again, to look for risk factors. And one thing they're going to do in the UK, a lot of vet clinics use the same software. So we talk about, like, if you're in a big healthcare system here, right, you could be in one place and they can pop up your medical record. Unfortunately, veterinary clinics in the United States, we use electronic records, but they're not connected, right, in any way, unless you're at a big place like Banfield. Blue Pearl, maybe, right? They're going to have some connection. But in the UK, they're all connected using, or most of them, I believe, using Vet Compass. And so these folks are looking at data from Vet Compass and our data. So our data is going to be more involved, but they've got this just enormous database. So the Royal Veterinary College folks are going to start crunching some of our data, and they're starting now because we have enough diagnoses that they feel pretty comfortable to start looking at that. We also have, because of the hemangiosarcoma that I mentioned to you, we had a big initiative recently where we were encouraging researchers actually from around the world. So this is one from around the world to come to us for funding, but we also encourage them. It wasn't a requirement, but please use our data and our samples, right? We've got all this. We've got a lot of hemangiosarcoma cases. We probably have enough to start making some conclusions, and we would love for you to start using it. And we've always given our samples and data out for free.
Wow.
No matter who.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no matter who asked for it. I think the only time we would say, can you help us pay for shipping? Because a lot of this stuff has to be like frozen and cold and things like that. So we've been doing that for a while, but we would often have to say to people, look, you got to come up with your own funding. You could apply to us through our regular grant cycle, but with the hemangiosarcoma, we decided we are going to give data and money and samples to people so people can apply for both in the same grant. And we're getting ready to review some of those proposals. I've been looking at them and they are all over the world. People have asked us for samples and data. So we're really excited about people finally really looking at that.
Well, that's wonderful that you're doing that, because collaboration is one of the things that just it drives me nuts, because there's not enough collaboration. Not only do our machines, our hardware, and our software in the clinics not talk to each other. If you ever have to, yeah, as you know, as you were intimating, if you ever have to transfer your charts from one vet hospital or clinic to the ER, it's really a nightmare. So we do but on the second level, and I think the more important level, is we just don't have enough collaboration cross institution, and whether that's sharing data, like you were saying, the epidemiological data or histological data or whatever. That's data that needs to be out there so that anybody can do anything and take it and run. And if they have a novel idea, if they want to do something different, they have that data. So that's really important. Also, publishing, as you know, we funded clinical trials and studies, and unfortunately, we've never been able to. It's always been a concern of mine. It's like, well, we just funded a study. We've got some data that's useful now. How do we get that out into the public domain? Because on the one hand, you want researchers to be able to collaborate and use that data for additional research projects, but on the other hand, you want pet parents to have that data to be able to make more informed medical decisions on behalf of their Fuzzybutts. So is your plan, in addition to making all of the data, the histological data open to researchers, are you going to publish the data and make that available to all pet parents, to the public?
Yeah, we're hopeful. We've been spreading the word a bit through some of our publications. So we have like a quarterly newsletter, and every quarter we put in, here's some publications you might be interested in. We do it electronically as well. We push it harder to the veterinarians, and each month we send out a electronic email that we say, here are a few publications. Obviously they came out of Morris, but that you may be interested in. And we try to select ones that are of interest to veterinarians. However, we have lots of pet parents who actually subscribe to the veterinary newsletter. And then we have a pet parent electronic newsletter where we put in, here's links to some publications. And we try to pick not the deep, heavy duty science ones, but those. We also put every publication either goes out on, well, up till recently, Twitter and LinkedIn, because that's where our researchers are. So we're trying to get out there, right, to share information they may not have access to. We will continue. We've done a few webinars for our population. We have something called Golden Zoomies, which is geared toward our Golden Retriever Lifetime Study folks, but anybody can tune in. And we try to get our researchers on, or people discussing. We've done some nutrition, obesity. We just had a gang from a gang of oncologists come on. So Dr. Andy Flory from PetDX, who you may know, Dr. Jerry Post from PhytoCure, and Rod Page, who was our principal investigator of the study. They all came on, they just chatted about cancer, and their focus was these diagnostics, right? There's lots of new diagnostic tests coming out there. What are they? What do they do? What are they looking for? So we try to get that information out there. But your point is well taken, which is really trying to hit on as many channels as we can. And we also, I don't want to say we put our feet on the researchers, but we do gently push to make sure that they get it out. And when they apply to us now, we have a whole section where they have to tell us how they're going to get this information out there. Like, what's your plan to disseminate this? And it can't just be, we're going to publish. Like, that's not, you can't write that. You have to tell us, how are you going to, what's your communication plan for your results?
In the end, they can't, it's not their determination whether they get published or not. Some publications are just not going to want the study's too small, or for whatever reason that is. But getting it to the public as quickly as possible, to me, is a high priority, because whatever the data is, the pet parents that want to know and have access to that data, it can affect the decisions that, as you know, as they make. And I think maybe having the preliminary results or as a white paper might be an effective way for you to do that. Make the white paper available to pet parents, and if that's a course that Morris takes. We have puppy up walks. We used to have them all over the country. Since the pandemic, it's fewer the number we have, but still, whatever way that we can through our walks, we'd be happy to disseminate those white papers to our network, our community of 100,000 plus pet parents around the country, probably larger than that. But that's data. If you talk to Phil, I'm a really good friend of Phil Bergman, who runs the clinical trials for VCA. And he and I, we're both data guys. And so I'm like, data, we need, Ginger, how many times do I talk about data on Fuzzybutts and Friends? Every episode.
Especially if it has to do with Phil every time. Every time we talk to Phil, we talk about data.
Yeah, because one day soon, and this is another question, it might be a little bit more technical in nature, and one for the Royal College in London. But humans are very limited in our ability to be able to process massive amounts of data. And you, like you said, you have a lot of data points out there with your study. So AI is going to be the most effective tool to be able to look through that data and see things that the people can't see, statistical trends that people can't see or can't easily see, or an epidemiologist. So do you know if the epidemiologists are using AI tools to help?
I don't know, but some of the grants we got through him at the Hemangiosarcoma Initiative are using AI.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So that's something that a couple people are trying to use to comb through it. There's some big initiatives. The University of Florida is really doing a lot with AI right now down there. So I'm not sure. Some of them are looking, trying to use it with histologic samples as a way, right, of looking at biopsy specimens to look for things, right, that we can't detect with our human eyes, but that they may be able to detect. So I think there's a few people, right, trying to harness that sort of information right now, really trying to look at stuff that we just can't process, right? We just physically can't.
Right. We just had Jaime Modiano on our show, and he's got Modiano Labs up in the Twin Cities, and he has a particular interest, or he's working on AI and hemangio. So I was excitedly going to ask you if he had applied.
He did not, though. Jaime is a very close friend of mine. We've been friends. We were resident mates together. We worked at National Jewish together. I went to his wedding. Wow. Like we were just up there filming with him and his group. His group has applied. Jaime's part of it, but it is not he's not the primary investigator on it. Yeah. But yeah, he's done a ton of work. We funded him for, I can't even.
Yeah.
He said the real name shouldn't be Morris Animal Foundation, but there was a time when he called it the Modiano Animal Foundation, because we actually sent quite a bit of, we've sent a lot of funding up that way to University of Minnesota, but they have a really strong group in hemangiosarcoma in particular, of course.
And brain cancer too. Yeah. And brain cancer. I hope to get up to, get up there to tour Modiano Labs and see some of the firsthand. And I have the Puppy Up Foundation has a particular interest and looking at hemangio, in particular AI, because one of our big concerns, I'm sure as you know, is a number of dogs that are euthanized unnecessarily because we just don't have a better testing mechanism, diagnostic mechanism, and that's going to require some looking for some markers and some very complicated computational work. So that's very exciting. So we have a reason to talk offline, because I have an interest in seeing maybe potentially how the Puppy Up Foundation and Morris Animal could work on, collaborate. However you guys structure your studies, that would be of an interest, because we're also interested in roping in Modiano Labs, Jaime, as well. So, but we'll
Right.
take that conversation offline because we can't nerd out too much. We might put Ginger to sleep over there.
I know.
All right. So, okay. So so I'm excited about all the data. Kelly, is there any of that data that you're comfortable with, that Morris, that you're willing to share with our pet parents now? So give us an idea of what we're looking at, whether it is what percentage of that 3,000 have been DX'd with cancer. We've already talked about the most common types of cancers. We can talk about that more, but can you give us some of the data, some of the things that you're seeing right now? Preliminary?
Yeah, I'll try to. So we're approaching 500, as I said, we're really close to 500 diagnoses of those top four, and that does not include histiocytic sarcoma. But so we're talking roughly, let's see, we're about 350 diagnoses of, or 300 and some diagnoses of hemangiosarcoma, all death, I mean, we haven't had any cures that we've seen. I mean, they happen sometimes. However, not everybody's died yet. So we'll have to see how that goes. Roughly 150 with lymphoma. We have a couple of interesting publications. We did one with the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so right where Ginger was not that long ago. And some of the folks there are really interested in toxin exposure and development of cancer, particularly lymphoma. And their group did a project, one of their students did a project trying to look at, because we have GPS, right? We have all the locations for the dogs. And they tried to look at data like, how close do you live to, toxic waste dump or Superfund site or whatever. And they were looking at lymphoma. And on the top level, they did not find any association with location and lymphoma. But, and this is a big but, they found that maybe some subtypes of lymphoma, ooh, this looks interesting. So their lymphoma is not one disease. There are, I think, 100 subtypes now in people. There are 20 to 30 in dogs. So it's not a monolith. And we know that they have different prognoses. And the more we look, the more we find subtypes. And so anyway, the University of Wisconsin was like, this is kind of interesting. And we funded Dr. Lauren Trepanier, who's one of their big researchers there. She's an internist like me, and I've known her for a long time. And then she got a PhD in pharmacology. But Lauren is now doing a study with our girls, Golden Retriever Lifetime Study samples, but she's looking at lymphoma and toxin exposure. And she's looking at blood and urine samples. And of course, we got this banked for a long time, right? And so she's going to look at samples. She also did a study where she was looking at people in the same household with dogs diagnosed with cancer. Not that the people were, but she was collecting some samples from them. So her jam is all lymphoma. She's lost several dogs. She has boxers. Boxers get a particularly nasty form of lymphoma. She's lost some dogs. This is a project that's really close to her. And so stay tuned on that one, because at first we were like, well, okay, it is what it is if we can't see an association, but it looks like the subtypes, there may be association. So it may not be, well, T-cell lymphoma doesn't, but boy, B-cell, this looks like a big risk factor and you need to be careful. But she's really expanding out that particular finding. So that was one cancer finding that we have in the works. We also did some work looking at T-zone lymphoma, which is a real bizarre variant of lymphoma. Typically, we think of T cells being really bad, but there's this T-zone, which isn't. It's kind of indolent and slow, and it seems to be a lot in Goldens, and we're learning a little bit about it. But when we looked at some dogs, this was very early in the study. We shared data with CSU on some dogs that didn't quite make it into the study, but we knew information had samples, and omega-3 fatty acids seems to be protective. Another thing that was protective, which we don't understand, and I would not suggest leaving your dog hypothyroid, but dogs with hypothyroidism seem to have a low, it was protective in some ways, but I we don't know if it's just because these guys, their immune system's a little wacky, right? Because they have low thyroid but definitely omega-3 fatty acids is probably something that is not harmful. And at least in the case of certain forms, lymphoma might be helpful. So that's, go ahead.
I have a question before you on. My apologies.
Yeah.
Got to wrap my head around that because I have a hypothyroidic dog. I have a dog with hypothyroidism. And so were you saying that dogs that have hypothyroidism have a lower incidence of lymphoma specific
T-zone, which is not a particularly aggressive, but there was a association. And I think while that was something we put in our press release, like, wow, that's kind of interesting. I think the speculation was it may be because their immune system is a little not up to stuff. I would never, ever, ever, as you know, recommend not treating your dog for hypothyroidism, because there's all other kinds of bad stuff that happens. But this is some of the things, one of the things that we hope from the study is that it will tease something out. And we're like, we got to pull on that thread some more. Like, what the heck has thyroid levels have to do with this? Because we know a lot of Goldens are hypothyroid and they still get an awful lot of cancer, right? So what's this weird T-zone thing? So that's something we need to sort out some more. But we have one thing that's important about the study is we never intervene with anything. We never say, you should be doing this. Or in fact, some of our communications, we actually stopped doing some because we thought, oh, we'll send out fun facts, right? Like, hey, this many dogs eat carrots. But then we were worried because we might be influencing people indirectly that carrots are a good thing, and we would skew our data. Or if we said, hey, this is the most common type of heartworm preventive, right, used by our group, maybe people would think, oh, are they trying to tell me that's the better one? So we're very, very careful what we put out there because we don't want to skew anything, because that data is really, really important for us to know.
And also you want that diversity in data, though. You want somebody to be on Heart Guard, but you want other group of Goldens to be on a different brand, and you want a dog to be on from Kibble, some of the Goldens, and some of the Goldens to be on what's another good brand of dog food, Ginger? Origin, or
Science Diet, or
what's
Royal
VCA's
Canin.
new Royal Canin, be on something like that. So I would imagine that's so smart that you guys did that, because you're right, is you could totally skew the results. And more importantly, you don't want people to be doing all the same thing, because you want to see those little pockets of unexpected statistical phenomena, outliers, where he's like, this is weird. Dogs on can't say Royal Canin or whatever brand X seem to be getting a lot of this type of cancer, this weird type of cancer. And you say, as you said, this warrants some additional study downstream. So boy, it's so wonderful that I'm so glad we finally got a chance to talk, and I could learn more about this study, since unfortunately I got cursed with Pyrenees and not Goldens. I would have been blessed with Golden Retrievers, but I got the Pyrenees. Somehow I got them. No, I'm kidding. But let's see. So I want to go over some data. We're running a little long. My apologies. I will go ahead and wrap it up here soon. But I think this is important. So I want to make sure my numbers are clear. So you've had 500 cases, new cases of cancer out of 3,000 patients. Is that number fairly accurate?
500 diagnoses of the four. We're heading for the four main. So we have a little bit. We have a little bit over that. It is cancer is our number one cause of death now in our cohort.
Number one cause of death. It's not surprising, unfortunately, but could it be the same dog, the same enrollee with developed a new different type of cancer, one of those four, or are they all like that? Could be the case.
It could, but we haven't seen that yet. That's a good question. But we may have seen a dog that had, let's say, a low-grade mast cell tumor and then developed lymphoma. I mean, or
but typically you're not going to see a dog that has some angio that's going to get osteo or something like that. But then again, we're talking
not
about
yet.
We're talking about
that would be terrible bad luck, right?
We actually seen that one of your actually it was a patient of CSU, Hope's dog. Hope's American Bulldog was osteosarc, then it got lymphoma. It got everything. It was, I think, 3 or 4 different types of cancer, but it was like a 9-year survivor, I think, of osteosarcoma.
Yeah.
It's just one of those outliers. Tremendously interesting case. So that's 500 cases of cancer. When you started the study, what was the year that you started the study?
2012, in June, we enrolled the first 50 pilot dogs, and then we opened enrollment to everyone August of 2012, and then we reached our 3,000. We actually have 3,044, and it just was because of dogs still in the pipeline, and we thought, well, and we finished enrollment in March of 2015. So we're 8 years now fully, right? Fully enrolled dogs. We had our first teenager, but what was really sad is I went in to like double check because someone said, "Oh, Bowie." Hi, Diane, because I'm just going to give a shout out to Diane.
Sure.
Bowie's the oldest dog. He's the first teenager. And when I went in to just double check and I said sort by age, it's like deceased, deceased, deceased. There's Bowie. You know what I mean? So we're seeing a huge group of dogs die off, which we would expect, right? Their average age is 8.4 years. Now, what will be interesting is as dogs get older and maybe don't get cancer, right, and survive longer, will our causes of death change? I still think cancer will be way up there, but we may have some oldsters that go, cause of death is age-related changes, right? They got arthritis so bad, they've got cognitive declines, they have kidney disease or something else. So it'll be interesting to see if we skew or if we never skew, right, to a different, and cancer just keeps picking them off like it is now. It's pretty tragic to actually, we have scarcely a day anymore that we don't lose a dog to cancer.
Yeah. What did you have did you have an age limit or age restriction on enrollees so that you can actually follow them over a lifetime? What was the age? What was that age?
24 months. So they had to be under 2 years of age when they enrolled. So we had a couple bump up close to that when they enrolled, but mostly they were younger for that reason.
Yeah, you could theoretically then have dogs that could be 12 years old. Then if you started the study in 2012, they could have been 2 at the time. So actually older than that. So yeah, you're going to start seeing the mortality rate increase significantly. What is the average? Do you know, Kelly, what is not the average? What is the youngest age of diagnosis of cancer you've seen within that group population of Goldens? Do you know?
That's going to be tough. I know we had a couple young ones with weird cancer, and I don't know, but maybe a little under 5, but at 5 is when we started seeing the uptick, when dogs started to hit
but
5.
You're not seeing
pretty darn young.
It's very young, but on my travels, I've seen dogs as young as osteosarc as young as 2 years old, 1 to 2 years old. I've seen lymphoma as young as 6 months. I've seen mast cell tumors. Craig Clifford pulled one of them off at his clinic that was 6 or 8 weeks old. I think that's right. Wow. But those are fortunately anomalies for the most part right now. I guess my question is that so the good news is you're not seeing, of those top 4, the 4 major killers in Goldens, you're not really seeing those at a young age, correct? Is that fair?
Right. And the thought is, when a dog dies at a very young age of cancer, it's probably they were born with a genetic abnormality. It's probably not an exposure, right? Is the current thinking. And in fact, interestingly, the original plan was to start following dogs at 5 years of age for this study. But then people said, but no, we're missing 5 years of exposures that may be really important, right? In the development of cancer later. So we started earlier. So if we're talking about risk factors in a very general way, those take time, right? And exposure. So when we see really young dogs, they probably had some kind of genetic problem they were born with, and it's not an exposure, if that makes sense, as far as how you view cancer in big buckets.
Right. If you, yeah, it does because obviously the parallels between cancer in humans and people and at least dogs, the canine model are very, very similar. And if you're going to get exposure, that exposure has to occur over a number of years, or you're not going to see it for a few years, the net result of that mutagen, or mutagen that affects your DNA, that's for sure. So I find that very, very interesting. Are there any other data points or any other trends or any other interesting bits of information you'd like to pull out of the study and tease our audience and say, hey, here's a little teaser. Make sure when we publish this thing in 2024, you guys can want to.
Oh, a teaser. Oh, that's
I mean,
gonna be
anything
hard.
interesting? You said, I know you're tracking diet, nutrition. Are you finding that? Here's an easy one that just came to mind. Are you finding that Goldens are generally healthier if they're on a kibble diet or a raw diet, or is diet not really affecting your results?
We haven't looked we have a few people trying to look at our diet data, and I'm going to say it out loud. It's a mess because people now I have friends in the human health field who are like, oh, you think you're a mess? People are really a mess because we eat most of our dogs eat a pretty standard diet, but we're working on what's called cleaning the data, right? We have to clean because we have free text fields, and we might have someone where we'll be like, do you give your dog dairy? No. And in the free text field, they write, I give them cheese. Okay, well then that data needs to be cleaned, right? And cheese needs to go under dairy, and maybe we'll split it out, but at least that kind of needs to be taken into account. We have a couple of people who are starting though to look at just in big categories, right? Do you feed a raw diet? Do you feed a kibble? What percentage, right? Because a lot of people actually mix quite a bit. And they feed a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you try to put a percentage around it. And so we have people who are looking at that. Nothing that ever jumped out at us, except we did have a few dogs on certain diets who developed dilated cardiomyopathy. And we provided samples to Dr. Josh Stern at the University of California because he was kind of curious. Well, they developed it. Hey, you got samples banked for a couple years. Can you send them to me so I can see, was there something developing way back? I mean, because there's some evidence now that doesn't take very long to have markers of cardiac damage, even though the dog will be perfectly fine. They're not in heart failure. They're not showing any signs, but there may be something to that. So that was the only one that did jump out at us. And it wasn't a huge number. I'll be really frank with you. We didn't see a huge number, but we started getting phone calls a few years ago, as just when this was starting to be a problem. And people are like, have you ever heard of this? We're like, huh? I don't know. And we started poking around, and then we got more calls, and we were like, oh, you guys need to start reporting this, right? Go to your vet, tell them what's going on, report to the FDA, like file a report. And then we shuffled some people. The two big places were Tufts and University of California, Davis, who were looking at taurine, right, and carnitine and all this stuff that was maybe implicated. But that jumped out. That we did actually pick up in real time because we started getting phone calls from people about it. But nothing, knock on wood, nothing else from that. I think that the exposure to things like herbicide, pesticide, we have some people looking at exposure to Roundup. I'll tease that out there that are looking at that. Exposures.
Well, if you can get that data out there to as quickly as possible, and so long as it produces certain results, you could have a class action lawsuit for pet parents that gets Roundup and at least pay nice meals for their pets. Go ahead.
It'll be interesting to see. For sure, Dr. Lauren Trepanier tells every one of her, and she's made a difference to me. She goes, if that lawn looks bright pearly green that you're walking by in your neighborhood, or you're in a park and the grass looks perfect, don't let your dog go on it. Yeah. You want to be on the one with the weeds and the one that looks scrappy, because she is absolutely convinced that exposure is not okay.
That is an important, such an important study, because obviously it affects the whole household, the children that crawl on the lawn, and it's not just companion animals. Another one is diet, nutrition. I've tried to the extent that I could have and can to get the food industry, the pet food industry, to do a longitudinal, multi-year, multi-breed, multi-food type study that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars if you were going to do it right. But they have the financial resources to do it, but they absolutely have no interest in doing it whatsoever. And it's such critical information. It's such a disappointment. The pet food industry really is just so profit driven. It's just been a tremendous disappointment. I don't mean to speak ill of anyone, but it's such a hyper competitive business environment that collaboration on that level, it just is not possible, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we
need
tough. More. But we need more diet and nutrition data out there. All right, we're running a little bit long. My apologies. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell pet parents out there from Morris Animal Foundation, or tell our golden families out there? Anything you'd like to say?
I think we're at a really exciting point, and it was deadly dull. I'll admit it. Our cohort's like, oh, aren't you going to tell us anything? But we're finally there. We are finally reaching that point, and we have lots of people who are interested, who are working on it. And I suspect in the next couple of years, we will start being we're hoping a paper writing machine out of here with all of our collaborators, because it's what people have been waiting for. And the really important thing is it'll target us into, I think, better studies. Like, we're like, don't look at this. This is not going to mean anything. We need to be looking over here and focusing attention on this potential risk factor. Or, you know what, hey, we found a disease we didn't even think was linked to naming exposure or diet or a treatment. And we need to be doing that. So that, I will tell people that that's coming. And a small plug for us right now is we're in the middle of our Stop Cancer Forever. We do it every year, or in the springtime. We try to raise funds. This stuff this year is going to be put toward, some always goes toward the Golden Retriever Lifetime Study, always, because it's a $32 million study and we need to raise money. And also our hemangiosarcoma initiative. So we're really beating the pavement, raising funds, and that's going to be several years. Like, we really want to put a lot of money toward it so we can move the needle on that disease.
Well, where can the audience go find out more information and help donate?
Really long address. Sorry, everyone. MorrisAnimalFoundation.org. And you can find all of our stuff. We have some of our studies. We have stuff for everybody. We have some researcher information. We have our published papers you can link to if you're into that. We have newsletters. We have blogs that talk about some of the things that we've done and funded, and interviews with some of our researchers. So you can poke around on the website and find things.
And you guys did this study a long time ago, but I always like to point it out because I thought it was the most fascinating study that nobody else would do, is why do black dogs not get adopted the same frequency as other dogs? And you found out, like, do you just think, knucklehead, you should have known this. You put a black dog in the back of a shelter or rescue where it's got poor lighting, you can't see the anthropomorphic, the facial expressions that all puppy dogs have. And so I thought that was such a great study you guys did that nobody else would do. So I think that, I think that's what I love about Morris Animal Foundation. You guys have sort of cut your own path. You've gone your own way, and you're producing a lot of great results. And I hope this study is the first of follow-on studies, an additional part 2, whether it's Goldens instead of Goldens, it's Boxers, because Boxers and Bulldogs, there are tumor factories as well. We can get a lot of data. But I want to say one more thing. I just thought about it when I was listening to you talk, is that look, we could spend billions of dollars on research, right? Because we have that much research that we have to do. More than that, probably. But it's a resource allocation issue. And we have to make sure that if we're going to be doing clinical trials, or we're going to be doing research, and we probably want to use those resources efficiently. And what I like, what your study has produced and yielded, is that it's like you said, it's sort of given us this idea, this platform to realize, hey, this is something that we should go study additionally or further over here, because we don't know a lot about it. It might give us so really it's kind of like your studies become a farm for allocating research dollars. I like that. And so that's something that we just need going on ad infinitum. is what I said, what I would say. So if there's, I'm not sure this would be a conversation with you, but whoever there at Morris, it would be a start of a conversation, is that we really need to think about whether you guys are the biggest, obviously the biggest and the oldest foundation. You got Gary's outfit, you got a couple other people out there that are all small. We're all small compared to Morris and Morris. But you know, if we get together in terms of our supporter base and our community as well, and just say, let's just fund an ongoing study and put that together, and then figure out how all the foundations can kick in a percentage of that, or whatever they can kick in, and then do joint fundraisings for this one single study just to propagate data. And like you said, identify these areas of interest that we should pursue and put more money in. So, wow, this has been a great conversation for me. I hope it has been for you, Kelly.
It's been so fun. It's been great being on.
Thank you.
It's really informative.
Yeah, lots of information. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else that we missed on our end?
No, it was great chatting with you guys. I hope people are interested. They can read more about obviously the study and yeah, keep your eyes open. I think we're going to be wrapping it up in the next few years, and we're really, really excited because we're finally seeing stuff and numbers that make sense, and we're excited. We're not excited that it means that a dog died to give us those numbers. I mean, there's always a lot of sadness with it, right? Whenever we talk, we can get really focused on the data, but there are people behind every one of those dogs. There's a veterinarian who's cared for that patient and put in a lot of time and effort. There's the folks who work here who talk to those people and talk to everyone, and there are folks that I know. So it's a tribute to them. Think about them when you think about this. Without them, we would be nothing.
It's absolutely true. I've never, every pet parent that I've met that's been a part of one of our clinical trials have always said they've lost their kid either during the trial or after. Just make sure that we use the data for something that benefits, that prevents another pet parent, another one of our Fuzzybutts having to go through this madness, this nightmare, this pandemic, which is cancer in our companion animals. So I know that I've talked to so many pet parents, and I know that I've met so many pet parents that are a part of the Golden Retriever, your wonderful study, and they're very loyal to you, to what you guys have done. And I'm a believer in an N of one, that every dog, every person, every incidence of cancer is important for the corpus of knowledge that we all can benefit from. So Ginger, I guess on that note, I've gone long. My apologies. I could go longer because I'm a data nerd and this is such a wonderful study, but we've reached that time in the show where Ginger tells me how much I've screwed up and all the stuff I've left out, right? I did a bad job.
No, I think you've done a great job. You asked all the pertinent questions. One of the things, typically the Puppy Up Foundation and I give out a cancer tip of the week. But what I wanted to ask you, Dr. Diehl, is like, if you take hemangiosarcoma, are there some early signs that the pet parents can look for maybe some clinical signs or behavior signs that may lead to a diagnosis of hemangiosarcoma?
That's a real tough one because typically, I think the typical history is my dog was fine. I have people who were out on a walk and they go down. But I will say some dogs have probably bleed a little bit ahead of time. And that can be very subtle, from like staggering to feeling a little off, and then they can rebound. And I would tell people, when you sometimes see that, especially in a large breed dog, a dog that may be predisposed to hemangiosarcoma, I don't know that I would ever always blow that off, because that can be an early sign, and that would be important, right? If you could get that dog early, whether it needs surgery, and instead of taking a crashing patient to surgery, you're taking a dog with a spleen mass to surgery, that might be something that would help people. The other thing is making a diagnosis early, right? Like just finding that. So that's something that when I talk to people, they'll go in hindsight, I said they were okay, but I actually noticed they seemed off, or they like sit down like, whoa, something just happened. And then maybe an hour later, they'd be okay. I would not blow that off.
Yeah,
That's very, very good advice. I know,
and blood. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
With one of my dogs, and she doesn't have hemangio, but it was a behavior issue with her that changed. Like my pet sitter was like ecstatic because she'd been taking care of my dog for like 5 years. And she said, she actually let me pet her. And then I was like, oh, well, that's cool. And then I started jokingly said, well, she must be sick. And I thought about it. And then I had, an ultrasound done, and she had a stomach cancer. And when I took her in to have it removed and everything, I was saying, well, what's the prognosis? And they're like, well, we don't know because nobody catches this early, because she really didn't have any clinical signs.
Right. I think behavior, that my dog isn't right. Is sometimes really, especially if you spend a lot of time with your dog, I put a lot of stock in that. I had an old veterinarian when I was in college, and I'm doing the, kennel cleaning, Kelly, get in surgery, answer the phone kind of job, right, before vet school. And he felt that way. And at the risk of being sexist, I will say this was in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And he said it about women who a lot of people were working from home, right? They're homemakers. And he said, I'll tell you, if a homemaker who spends a lot of time with their dog comes in and says, my dog is not right, he goes, I pay a lot of attention. And I think that I carried that with me. No matter if somebody said, I spend a lot of time with my dog and something is not right and I can't put my finger on it, that usually, like, we should pay attention to that, because it's often very, very important that person that's there all the time is like, something's different. Like your pet person who said, I could pat the dog, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's very true with Lily. She won't even let me. I've known Lily for 12 years, 14 years of her life, and she won't even let me pet her. So it's very true. Well, the good news is you mentioned Andy Flory earlier at Pet DX, is that they've got a wonderful technology that hopefully it seems like it's doing a pretty good job of getting early diagnoses for a whole host of cancers, including the big ones. I think the percentages are pretty high. And so hopefully over the next few years, we won't have to work. We won't have to lean so much on one's intuition. Will have better diagnostics, because, as you know, what makes hemangio so deadly is it's just silent. And at the point that your kid becomes symptomatic, it's typically very, very advanced, and the prognosis is not good. So, all right, Dr. Kelly Diehl she is am I getting the title right? The Director of Science Communications with Morris Animal Foundation. Is that right?
You're very close. Senior Director of Science Communications. So I got that senior. It's to go with my gray hair. They may be Senior Director.
you need a new pronoun or a new adjective or whatever. They were making up words these days, but you look great. You're doing some great work at Morris Animal Foundation. It's wonderful to hear that you've been with them for so many years. We know it's going to be around for many, many years forward. I'm going to preemptively invite you back to our show, to be on our show, hopefully in a year from now, when you guys start crunching some numbers, get some preliminary results on the data. You're welcome back here anytime to talk about anything that Morris is working on as it pertains to Fuzzybutts, or fuzzy, what did you call them? Fuzzy fins?
Fuzzy fins,
Yeah,
fuzzy feathers.
Feathers, yeah, scales, fuzzy scales, right?
Exactly. So anytime you have anything that pet parents out there need to know, Kelly, you are welcome back on our show, because indeed you are a friend of the Fuzzybutts for sure.
Well, thank you. It was really fun. And I am so excited. I am hoping that I can come on in a year and give you some more hard data.
I'll make sure to do that. Ginger will go ahead and pre-book the show for next year. We'll keep you to it. All right, everybody. That concludes this episode of Fuzzybutts and Friends. Thank you as always. You can listen to us on your podcast platforms such as iHeartRadio or Spotify, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. It's at fuzzybuttsstudios.com. Until next week, puppy up. Talk soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.